Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Anastasia, and if you're new here, I've been learning English and German for many years now, and I call myself a lifelong learner, and I find learning English and German by reading books one of the most effective methods when it comes to remembering, retaining new words, and also using new words in context appropriately. I'm super glad that you've stopped by, because in today's episode we're going to be talking about this American masterpiece, Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. And as usual, I've actually reread this book, and I was taking notes, and I've accumulated quite many of those. I've also come up with a list, and I've got sections devoted to grammar, and then also just to sort of broken down a bit. I've got adjectives, nouns, verbs, phrasal verbs, adverbs. If you want to find out the difference between this whale and this whale, then stay tuned, because we're going to be discussing them along the way. So let's get started then. So let me begin by telling you that the novel is told from Nick's perspective. Who's Nick? Nick happens to be Gatsby's neighbour, because after graduating in Yale, which instantly gives us some additional information about the privileges Nick was born into, he decides to go east, and so New York, and settles down at West Egg, which is again a coincidence because it happens to be literally next door to Gatsby's mansion. The story begins when one afternoon he drives over to Daisy's house, which happens to be just across the bay and at East Egg, the more fashionable of the two. Daisy is Nick's cousin. To use Jeanette's terminology, Nick is a homodiegetic, extradiegetic narrator, because he is participating in the story, or he's one of the characters of the story that he's telling, right? I have to say that the last book I discussed on this channel was Haruki Murakami's Norwegian Wood, and Toru Watanabe, the main character and the narrator, makes a statement that his all-time favorite book is The Great Gatsby. And this sort of sparked my interest, because I got curious, and I have to say, by rereading it, I've discovered that I've forgotten so much, right? On page 1, we learn something about the English noun advice. My father gave me some advice. Some advice. You can't give one advice or two advice. You can give one piece of advice, one snippet of advice, or some advice, but because advice happens to be uncountable. What is his advice like? Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone. Alright, you guys know by now that I am interested in these constructions, verb plus ing, right? Which is another way of saying the present participle constructions. And so feel like also demands the ing ending by the verb that follows it, right? So feel like criticizing anyone. And so it came about that in college, came about, a nice phrasal verb, to come about, to happen, right? I was unjustly accused of being another nice present participle construction with prepositional verbs, right? So to be accused of being or of doing something, just, unjust, unjustly, trying to expand this sort of map or this word family with just, right? By the way, it's injustice. Interesting, isn't it? Most of the confidences were unsought. We've come across the seek, sought in the picture of Dorian Gray, if I'm not mistaken, and so it's something he was not consciously seeking or looking for, right? Unsought, meaning he was picked by the people who decided to pour their hearts out to him, to confide in him, right? By just putting this Germanic prefix on in front of sought, you've got a nice adjective, unsought. By the way, I've got a video on prefixes, suffixes, or the rivalry between the Germanic and the Latinate prefixes and suffixes. It's fun. Go and check it out if you're interested. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. Here we've got the ending in as well, but the function is, so it's the gerund and the function is the subject, isn't it? Reserving judgments, subject, is verb, a matter of infinite hope. As my father snobbishly suggested. So someone is a snob who thinks they're better than other people. They tend to look down on poor people, on ordinary people. By the way, the adjective ordinary comes up so frequently in Norwegian Wood. And then we've got someone is being snobbish, or you suggest something snobbishly, right? A sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. So, the topic of injustice, the topic of inequality is addressed right at the beginning, right on page 1, because it's essential in this novel, right? And we'll see it's about the American dream, about the limitations of the American dream. The famous from rags to riches saying, no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. I think the writer consciously used the word privileged because, again, the topic of class, social belonging, socioeconomic status is such an important one. And what struck me this time by rereading it is that even though Gatsby has earned a fortune, he's made a fortune, right? He owns so much, but what he doesn't own is the recognition on the part of the people who surround him, right? Only Gatsby was exempt from my reaction, right? Very nice and useful construction, exempt from. So he doesn't count him in, he counts him out, right? It applies to everyone he knows, but not to Gatsby. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, right? So normally tigers or lions prey on their victims, right? And so it's spelled P-R-E-Y, which is opposed to when we pray to God, P-R-A or Y, isn't it? So a nice minimal pair, pray, but not minimal pair. They're homophones, pray, but that's spelled differently. So Nick graduated from New Haven in 1915 and came east in the spring of 22. All my aunts and uncles talked it over as if they were choosing a prep school for me. Okay, this is the first instance of the subjunctive mood. What I've double checked for you guys and for myself obviously is that the subjunctive mood as opposed to the indicative mood, right, is something that is not real, or the narrator is assuming, right, he is speculating, if you like, and the verb after the personal pronoun needs to be in the past simple or past perfect, and it needs to be were regardless of the personal pronoun, right? So they were choosing or she were choosing, because if it's not, then it's the indicative mood, most likely. She yawned, sitting down at the table as if she were getting into bed. Told you. Don't be surprised. His short hair looked as though it were trimmed every day. Told you. Personal pronoun it. Normally it's like it was, but no, it were trimmed every day because of the subjunctive mood. Right, and then he says something about his house. A weather-beaten cardboard bungalow. So a bungalow is a house on one ground, right? So all the bedrooms, bathrooms, living room, and etc., one ground. A Finnish lady. I thought it's an interesting adjective. So a person who comes from Finland, and also the language that is spoken in Finland, and is constructed similarly to English and Irish, Welsh, Spanish, Finnish. Right. A very interesting noun. My own house was an eyesore, but it was a small eyesore and it had been overlooked. An eyesore is an unpleasant sight in public spaces, actually, meaning that in stark comparison to Gatsby's mansion, his house was an eyesore, right? But it had been overlooked. And here we've got the first meaning of the verb overlook, not noticed. Then he's introducing his cousin Daisy and her husband. So Daisy and Tom Buchanan. They used to live in Chicago, and now they've moved to New York. And he says, I'd known Tom in college, right? So we've got this back shift in tense, past perfect. I'd known him. Across the Courtesy Bay, the white palaces of fashionable East Egg glittered along the water. Two things: bay as opposed to buy. Nice, minimal pair, right? Glitter, glisten and glow. That's why in the intro to this video you saw me wearing a glistening, gleaming, glowing dress. Glitzerkleid auf Deutsch. Because this is what stuck with me, like my how I imagine it to be. A lot of champagne being drunk or poured out, and everything is gleaming, glistening, glittering, glowing. That's it. Tom's family were enormously wealthy. Interesting instance of plural. So we are taught often that family is actually singular, right? But it's not wrong to say so his family were, when we are sort of thinking of the individual family members, and of course there are many of those, right? So we've got the extended family and the sort of immediate family, right? Or we just could also say the family, my family is based in Munich, for example, right? Why they came east, I don't know. They had spent a year in France for no particular reason, and then drifted here and there unrestfully wherever people played polo and were rich together. Yeah, I think there is a certain undertone to this statement. So Nick does not particularly approve of their lifestyle, does he? So they drifted here and there because they're so rich they just don't know what to do with themselves. And at one point Daisy actually poses this question: what shall we do with ourselves now in 30 years? And right, that's what on her mind, right? I mean, she's not worried how to make a living, obviously, because she's provided for, right, for the rest of her life, and so she's just enjoying herself. See, two old friends whom I scarcely knew at all. I love those relics that are indicative of the English language that once used to be an a morphologically complex one, or like a inflectional one, like Russian, like German, that used to have a lot of cases in place. Like German has 4 cases, Russian has got 6 cases. If you're interested, check out that video. And so this M at the end is indicative of the one of the cases, perhaps dative, I don't know, because in German it's definitely M, whom. Also, right, in this case in German it would mean also zwei alte Freunde sehen, die ich kaum kannte. Sorry for getting geeky, but it's in my nature. And so Daisy asks Nick, how's Chicago? And he says, the whole town is desolate. Right? Sad that they've left, right? All the cars have the left rear wheel painted black as a mourning wreath, and there is a persistent wail all night along the north shore. 2 things. Wreath. In one of my videos about phonetics and phonology, I draw a comparison between wreath and wrath. Wrath I've come across in Hanif Qureishi's The Buddha of Suburbia, I think. Might be the Black Album though. Oh, not sure. Anyway, a mourning wreath. It's very interesting. At the beginning of the novel, the theme of death and funeral is addressed for a reason, because you guys know how this novel ends, don't you? Very tragically. I was sobbing because the world is not a just place, and Gatsby worked so hard to get where he was then, and to end like this. The world is very cruel, or can be. And then, as promised, wail as opposed to veil, right? So veil used to, for example, cover your face, as an accessoire, as a part of the bride's hat, right? Veil, so v, this consonant is a fricative one, and v, labiodental, right? As opposed to wail. It's not an easy one to pronounce, myself included, guys. I'm telling you the truth here. But if it helps, wo is called a semi-vowel. Wo, right? So it's a semi-vowel and it's a bilabial one. So we need both lips, woo, and a bit of a vowel sort of quality in it. So, and wail is like moan, whine, cry, sob, all put together. And then Daisy suggests, let's go back, Tom. And then she added irrelevantly, right? So I've got relevant, you're making a relevant point. This is of huge relevance. This is totally irrelevant. Or she added irrelevantly, an adverb, an irrelevant criticism. You ought to see the baby, right? Because she and Tom, they've got a daughter, Peggy. You ought to see, I've double checked it, of course. It's called a semi-modal. So probably, or you could have said you should see the baby, right? You ought to see the baby, right? Inseparable, belongs together. You ought to see the baby. Miss Baker says we ought to plan something. Tom says everybody ought to read it. He is referring to the rise of the coloured empires. By the way, it was a revelation for me that he and Daisy are both racists. Jordan says you ought to live in California. Tom Buchanan, who had been hovering restlessly about the room, stopped and rested his hand on my shoulder. Oh, sorry guys, forgot about the commas. This is an instance of the so-called a non-defining, non-restrictive relative clause. And when it's non-defining, then we need commas. So, once again, Tom Buchanan, comma, who had been hovering restlessly about the room, comma, stopped and rested his hand on my shoulder. Right? So, the non-defining relative clauses, they give additional information, so which is actually not essential, but perhaps for this sentence it says something about his personality, right? There is another young woman in the room. Her name is Jordan Baker, Miss Baker. She's Daisy's friend, and she's also from Louisville. She gets up and says, "Oh, I'm stiff. I've been lying on that sofa for as long as I can remember." Right? So, stiff, steif auf Deutsch, right? So, it's like her body is aching from being in the horizontal position quite long. Then he said something about Tom. There was a touch of paternal contempt in it, with some harsh, defiant wistfulness of his own, and other instances indicate that he is rather violent, dominating, possessive, and actually aggressive. We'll see in a moment what he does to Myrtle, his mistress, giving away some details. They were both in white, and their dresses were rippling and fluttering, as if they had just been blown back in after a short flight around the house. As if. Another instance, told you. So interesting usage of the verb flutter in the picture of Dorian Gray. We've got an instance, the butterflies, they flutter like this, and the dresses were fluttering. Miss Baker's lips fluttered. It's getting hot in here. If she saw me out of the corner of her eyes, she gave no hint of it. He's talking about Jordan Baker, whom he calls insincere. The other girl, Daisy, made an attempt to rise, as the sun does every single morning. As soon as I arrived, I made an attempt to find my host. Make an attempt. A Caucasian. She leaned slightly forward with a conscientious expression. What does it look like? I'm asking myself, because conscientiousness is one of the personality traits in the famous Ocean model, isn't it? We've had agreeableness already in Emma. So Ocean, openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, right? She laughed again, as if she said something very witty. So he's speculating, right? He doesn't know why she laughed. That's why he uses the subjunctive mood. Daisy's murmur, and also Nick was murmuring an apology. Miss Baker's face was charming and a discontented one. So the impression was as if she were not content. And 4 candles flickered on the table, right? Flickern, flackern auf Deutsch, right? Flackern. Sometimes Daisy and Miss Baker talked at once, unobtrusively. So obtrusive, unobtrusively. Sort of, they were not disturbing one another's statements, so to speak. It was not noticeable. It was sharply different from the West. In sheer nervous dread of the moment itself. So we had sheer scenery in Norwegian wood, and now we've got in sheer nervous dread of the moment itself. Right? So pure fear or dread, sheer embarrassment. You make me feel uncivilized, Daisy, Nick says to Daisy, obviously. Then Daisy says, I'll tell you a family secret. She whispered enthusiastically, right? So her eyes were sparkling with enthusiasm. Her glowing face, told you. And then the glow faded. Why did it fade? Because the telephone rang. Tom's mistress is calling. The butler came back and murmured something close to Tom's ear. But everyone knows who is ringing. Daisy leaves and follows Tom inside, and there was a subdued, impassioned murmur. Was audible, right? So you could hear it in the room beyond, and Miss Baker leaned forward, unashamed, trying to hear or to overhear what they were talking about. The murmur trembled on the verge of coherence. So it was not coherent, it was incoherent, right? But still, you could hear some snatches of their argument, right? Simultaneously enchanted and repelled by the inexhaustible variety of life. Inexhaustible variety of life. So people are different, right? Various people. Exhaustible. So something is exhausting, somebody is exhausted, something is exhaustible, inexhaustible. Variety of life are sort of infinite, incessant, never ending. All I kept thinking about over and over is you can't live forever. So she's justifying her decision to start this affair with Tom. I'm going to make a list of all the things I've got to get. So she doesn't say I'll make a list, which would be like a spontaneous reaction, but so she's been thinking about it, so indicates her determination. A wreath with a black silk bow for mother's grave. That'll last all summer. Another instance of a wreath. You've dyed your hair since then. Die, spelled D-Y-E, is a homophone with to die, to pass away. East egg, condescending to west egg and carefully on guard. So we've got people coming from the east egg to partake in the celebrations, in the party, but they are condescending, meaning they're doing a favor, so to speak. But they're being careful and on their guard because they consider the people from the west egg below them. Nick and Jordan, they visit the library in Gatsby's house, and there is a man, owl-eyed man. He snatched the book from me, replaced it hastily on its shelf, muttering that if one brick was removed, the whole library was liable to collapse. It's a prediction, right? So it definitely would collapse. I've been drunk for about a week now, and I thought it might sober me up to sit in a library. Has it? Sober me up, right? To get sober, sort of to get your head clear because of the intoxication. And he is surprised. He says, the books are real. This is something very interesting because, I mean, people are in disbelief with regards to Gatsby's money and fortune, and they are fabricating or making up stories about how he's got this money, right? And for example, this remark, the books are real. Why on earth would they not be real? As if he was pretending. I was looking at an elegant young roughneck whose elaborate formality of speech just missed being absurd. He elaborates on this statement. Sometime before he introduced himself, I'd got a strong impression that he was speaking his words with care. Okay, something that doesn't flow naturally, something that requires an effort on the part of Gatsby to sound formal, and we'll learn later on that he is spreading the information that he is an Oxford man, and so the Oxford manners and language. Where is he from? What does he do? He asks Jordan. A dim background started to take shape behind him, but at her next remark it faded away, because she says she doesn't believe that he's an Oxford man. I've got the impression that everyone in this novel is pretending to be somebody that they're not. Tom is exempt from this, and also Nick. Gatsby began leaving his elegant sentences unfinished and slapping himself indecisively on the knee. Right? So he's sort of losing control of this formality and becoming himself, right? And we learn about his background, right? And Tom calls him a nobody from nowhere, right? But he is very conscious, makes a conscious effort to put on airs and graces, to evoke an image on the part of the people who surround him that he is not different from them, so to speak. Right? And I think it's remarkable how observable Nick is. To my astonishment, the thing had an authentic look. Again, interesting word choice, right? So incredulity, incredulous, authentic, right? Because people doubt Gatsby. And Gatsby says, I didn't want you to think I was just some nobody. It's on his mind. He knows what people are speculating behind his back. It hasn't been very graceful, but at least I don't pretend to be someone I'm not. I'm from a very poor background, just an ordinary girl, and I've got to make a cut here, to make a stop here, because my videos tend to get rather long, because I am a grammar geek, and every construction that seems interesting to me I tend to write down, and then I get lost in the details. Apologies for that, guys, but I hope this video has been helpful for you, at least to some extent, so you've been able to extract some interesting or helpful information for your future, because that's the aim, to learn together. And as I said, I consider myself being a lifelong learner, so the process is a lifelong one. So I wish you success and joy on your learning journey, and I will see you in my next video. Всем пока! Tschüss zusammen! Bye guys! Take care!